This video is sponsored by Surfshark. More on them in a minute.
In the fall of 2013, detectives with the Massachusetts State Police were frustrated. For more than 2 years, they had been working on an unsolved murder out of Hampden County, the brutal killing of a young woman. And though they had initially gotten some good leads, the case had since gone cold. As they pored over their stacks of files for what felt like the millionth time, investigators knew that things weren't looking good. They had already started fresh once before, and they couldn't afford to come up empty a second time. It was here, though, just when things appeared to be at their most dire, that detectives would finally spot something. It was a detail so minor that up until now it had been overlooked. However, it would turn out to be the very thing they needed to find the answers they were looking for.
As true crime enthusiasts, I think a lot of us view ourselves as fairly safety conscious, or at least just more aware of danger than your average member of the general public. We're not leaving our doors unlocked at night or picking up strangers on the side of the highway. No, we've seen how that episode of Unsolved Mysteries ends 1,000 times. Unfortunately though, these days, security is about more than just locking your doors, especially when it comes to being safe online. That's where the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark, can help. Surfshark offers what's known as a VPN or virtual private network. The purpose of this virtual private network is exactly what it sounds like: privacy. Basically, it functions as a little barrier between your devices and the rest of the internet, making sure that any information exchanged is encrypted and ensuring that your personal data stays personal, whether that's from giant companies trying to sell you things, cyber criminals trying to steal your identity, or anyone else who you just generally don't want in your business. One of the greatest things about using a VPN like Surfshark, though, has to be that it allows you to trick websites into thinking that your device is in a totally different geographic location than it actually is. Turns out your favorite show is now only available on Netflix Indonesia? No problem. Surfshark has more than 3,200 servers in 100 different countries, and switching your virtual location takes seconds. Or maybe you're actually in Indonesia and you need access to stuff at home. Same thing, just takes a couple of clicks. This feature comes in handy for us a ton, especially when looking up articles and shows for research, because so much stuff is geographically restricted these days, and with Surfshark we can easily get around any blocked content. Because Surfshark allows you to use one account across an unlimited number of devices, you can always have it with you, whether on your phone, tablet, or home computer. This is super great for those sketchy public Wi-Fi connections, which are often exploited by hackers. Honestly, I could go on about this all day, but the best way for you to see what I'm talking about is just to try it for yourself. In fact, if you sign up today and use code CRIMEZONE at checkout, you'll even get an extra 3 months free. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to try it out. You can sign up by copying the link on screen or by clicking the link in the description below. Thanks, Surfshark.
At 6:47 p.m. on August 26, 2011, authorities in Hampden County, Massachusetts received a 911 call from a man in his 20s. The man's name was Seth, and immediately upon being connected, dispatchers could hear that he was in a serious state of distress. He was screaming and crying and said that he had just found his girlfriend seriously injured and unresponsive on the kitchen floor of her home. Officers rushed over to the address in question, a 3-story apartment building in the city of Chicopee, where they found Seth sitting on the back porch. He was curled up in the fetal position, appeared to be in shock, and was still clutching his cell phone. He was taken to a nearby police cruiser for examination, while officers made their way up to the top floor of the building, where Seth said that he had made the chilling discovery. The apartment was home to a 20-year-old woman named Amanda Plasse. Upon entering the unit, police walked through the first room before making their way into the kitchen. It was here that they encountered a horrifying scene. The first thing that struck officers was the amount of blood in the kitchen. There was spatter, as well as cast-off marks from what had clearly been some kind of weapon, the combination of which had left blood on all 4 sides of the room. A woman, quickly identified as Amanda Plasse, was lying on the floor. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done to help her. She was dead. Though the exact cause of Amanda's death wouldn't be confirmed until later, it was obvious that she had been the victim of a brutal attack. She had multiple stabbing injuries to her body, which authorities speculated had come from a knife or bladed weapon. However, no such weapon was found at the scene. Though the 20-year-old was partially clothed, it did not appear that she had been the victim of a sexual assault. Rather, it looked like she had been attacked while in the middle of getting dressed. She was wearing a bra, pants that had not been properly buttoned, and socks. Several other details at the scene also quickly jumped out to investigators. These included a window in a front room of the apartment that appeared to have been broken from the inside out, as well as a series of bloody shoe prints. These shoe prints were of particular interest to police. For starters, since Amanda wasn't wearing shoes, they proved that someone other than her had been in the apartment. The shoe prints also suggested that a single person had likely been behind the attack, since all of them came from the same pair of shoes. Finally, the blood from the shoe prints, as well as most of the rest of the blood found at the scene, was dry, suggesting that Amanda had been dead for at least a couple of hours before she was found. While a forensics team continued to process the scene, detectives were left with the heartbreaking task of informing Amanda's family about the tragic nature of her death. Upon breaking the news, her mother, Michelle Matheson, collapsed to the ground. The situation made no sense. Who could have wanted her daughter dead? Friends and family members couldn't make sense of the tragedy either. They described Amanda as a true free spirit. A creative soul, she excelled at anything to do with the arts. She loved music and writing, had taught herself to play the guitar, was an avid journaler, and also dabbled in photography. She had a warm and magnetic personality, and was known for her ability to forge an instant connection with almost anyone, a trait that was further accentuated by her wild curly hair, her vivid green eyes, and her colorful tattoos. It was a gift that often came in handy during her work as a server at a local restaurant, where Amanda was known for being a hard worker who got along great with customers. As Amanda's loved ones were still desperately trying to wrap their heads around what had happened, investigators, meanwhile, were zeroing in on the first potential suspect. That person was Seth, who officers had noticed during their examination had blood on his clothing. For detectives with the Chicopee Police Department, Seth was an obvious person of interest to consider in his girlfriend's murder. For starters, he had been the one to report the crime, and he had further placed himself at the scene due to blood that had been discovered on his clothing. While he seemed extremely distraught, both at the time of making the 911 call and when officers arrived at the scene, some members of the investigative team questioned whether his reaction was genuine. They found his emotional response to be over the top and reasoned that it might be a performance designed to draw attention away from him as a potential suspect. Police also learned that Seth and Amanda had only been dating for a short period of time prior to her murder. So little time, in fact, that those close to the 20-year-old victim knew almost nothing about him, setting off further red flags in the minds of investigators. When Seth was brought in for questioning, detectives started off by asking him about his activities that day. In particular, they wanted to know whether he had been at Amanda's apartment prior to the murder, saying that they had witnesses who believed that they had seen his car outside a few hours earlier. Seth denied that this was the case, saying that he had been at work all day. He had been so busy that he had even had to call Amanda to say that he wasn't going to be able to give her a ride to work for her shift that afternoon at the restaurant where she worked.
Someone thought they saw your car at the apartment.
It wasn't. It really wasn't.
And you didn't go there at all?
I did not go there at all today. My car was at the job site. He was there all day.
What do you think happened? I mean, who do you think could have done this?
I don't know. I don't know her that well. I don't know what to tell you. It wasn't my car. I loved that girl. I wish I was there.
While other officers worked to check Seth's alibi, detectives probed for more information about his job. Upon learning that he was in construction, they asked him about the tools he used for work, wondering if one of these items could be the murder weapon that they had yet to find.
Hey, listen, this is important. This is important because one of the things I just came to my mind, you work roofing.
Right now I do roofing.
Right.
I'm a carpenter.
Do you have any tools on your belt, like, utility knife or anything?
I mean, right now I have a tool pouch. I leave it at the job site.
You have a knife?
Yeah, I think it might be at our house.
What kind of knife is that?
I don't know. It's just a cool looking knife, like wooden handle.
After hearing this, detectives alerted members of the investigative team still at the crime scene to be on the lookout for Seth's missing knife, speculating that this might be the murder weapon they were searching for. When they returned to the interview room, they also decided to turn up the pressure on Seth, asking him directly whether he was responsible for Amanda's murder. He denied any involvement, once again insisting that he was nowhere near the scene when the crime took place. Authorities were hours into this interview session when they received several new pieces of information from the forensics team. First, they had managed to lift a partial palm print from the smashed window in Amanda's apartment that they believed belonged to the perpetrator. Second, the bloody shoe prints that had been recovered from the scene had come from a pair of Nike Air Maxes that were determined to be either a women's size 9.5 or a men's size 7.5. Finally, Seth's missing knife was nowhere to be found. When detectives made comparisons between Seth and this new evidence, they quickly realized that he was not the perpetrator they were looking for. His palm print was not a match to the one found on the window, and he wore size 11 shoes, far bigger than those worn by the perpetrator. He was also wearing construction boots, which were not at all similar to the prints left at the scene. Instead, it appeared that the blood on Seth's clothing had come from when he had discovered Amanda's body and had frantically tried to see if she was still alive. Far from being an act, his serious emotional distress had been completely real and had continued well after he arrived at the police station for questioning. With that, he was cleared and released. While detectives couldn't have been more wrong about Seth, fortunately, they now had some solid evidence in hand. The question remained, though, could they use it to find the real killer? Roughly 24 hours into the investigation, an autopsy on Amanda's body was completed, revealing the full horrifying extent of her murder. She had been stabbed numerous times, her throat had been cut in 3 spots, and her heart had been punctured. At least 2 of the wounds had been fatal. Based on the blood at the scene, the medical examiner narrowed the window that the crime took place to between 4 and 5 p.m. on the day her body was discovered. Evidence further showed that Amanda had fought with her attacker, resulting in a large amount of the killer's DNA being left under her fingernails. A sample of the DNA was run through the CODIS database, but frustratingly, it returned no matches. Investigators caught another unlucky break when they began interviewing potential witnesses in the area around Amanda's apartment. Though it was a relatively busy neighborhood, they received almost nothing to go on. It appeared that no one had seen or heard anything suspicious around the time of the murder. It wasn't until detectives spoke with some of Amanda's close friends that they finally got their next lead, when several people mentioned a concerning incident that they thought might be related to the case. Authorities learned that prior to dating Seth, Amanda had been romantically involved with a man named Jesse, a co-worker of hers at the restaurant chain where she worked, called Friendly's. The two had dated for a while. However, Amanda had broken things off after Jesse wanted something more serious, and she wasn't ready for that kind of a relationship. Friends told investigators that the breakup had not gone well. They said that Jesse was obsessive, and Amanda had ended up blocking his number. About a week after ending things with Jesse, Amanda had started to see Seth. Things had apparently turned ugly when one day during her shift, Seth had decided to surprise Amanda at work. Jesse was also there that day, and friends said he immediately flew off the handle when he saw the two of them together. The situation culminated in Jesse yelling and swearing at Amanda in the middle of the restaurant, ending with him being fired on the spot. As he walked out the door, a couple of witnesses even claimed that they remembered him uttering vague threats. All of this had happened just days before Amanda turned up dead. After hearing this, naturally, detectives wanted to speak with Jesse, and he was brought in for questioning. During the interview, Jesse downplayed the situation, describing a much calmer version of events. When asked about his breakup with Amanda and her subsequent relationship with Seth, He more or less shrugged it off, saying that he wasn't happy about how things had played out, but rejecting the characterization that he was obsessed with Amanda.
You knew that Amanda was dating Seth.
Yeah.
How'd that make you feel?
It sucked, but what are you gonna do? I texted her one time about Seth.
And what did you say in that text?
I told her, I was like, you and Seth, that's cute.
While detectives were skeptical of Jesse's version of events based on what they had been told by witnesses, he was able to produce an alibi for the time of the murder. He said that he had been cashing a check at a local liquor store.
Where'd you go Friday?
Friday? Nowhere, really. Friday was the day I got my check.
Did you cash it?
No. I did cash it at General's.
What time were you at General's?
I went there around like 4:30 maybe.
One of the things we want to do is, because we want to fingerprint everybody, to exclude people if they were involved with this thing or not, including your fingerprints, and we take what we call palm prints as well.
Okay.
While waiting for the results of Jesse's fingerprint analysis, police checked his alibi. Surveillance video showed that he had indeed been at the store cashing his check at the time he claimed. Detectives drove the route Jesse would have likely taken if he had gone from Amanda's house to the store, and determined that the trip didn't seem to fit within their timeline of the case. Any remaining suspicion of Jesse was cleared following a second interview when his shoe and palm prints were both found not to match the evidence at the crime scene. Just as their second suspect was eliminated, detectives turned their attention to another potential person of interest. By this time, there had actually been a couple of witnesses who claimed that they had seen something that might be of interest to the investigation. These witnesses remembered seeing a female driver sitting in a vehicle in front of Amanda's apartment building at around 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of August 26th. Though they hadn't gotten the woman's license plate number, she had been driving some sort of four-door white sedan. The reason this unknown woman had stood out to the witnesses was because of how quickly and aggressively she had pulled off in her car when she left. Understandably, detectives were intrigued by what the witnesses had seen. Not only was this woman at Amanda's apartment building squarely within the window of time that the murder had taken place, they speculated that a female suspect might explain the seemingly smaller foot size of the shoe prints at the crime scene. With that, police put out an alert to the public and to the media, hoping to identify the unknown driver. Following the release of this alert, investigators were contacted by a woman who said that she was the person that they were looking for. Her name was Mercedes. She owned a white four-door Mazda sedan and was actually a friend of Amanda Plasse's. During questioning, Mercedes said that she had driven to Amanda's home on the afternoon of August 26th because she had asked her for a ride to work. Amanda had said that her boyfriend wasn't able to drive her, so she agreed to pick her up. However, when Mercedes arrived, she claimed that Amanda never came outside. She texted her at 4:18 p.m., asking her where she was, but Amanda never responded. Eventually, she left without ever getting an answer. Immediately, several details of Mercedes' story stuck out as odd to investigators. In particular, though, was the fact that she drove half an hour out of her way to pick up Amanda, only to leave without so much as trying to knock on her door when she didn't hear from her. When asked why she didn't get out of her car, Mercedes replied that she was in a hurry because she needed to get to Walmart before it closed. This was even stranger to detectives, as the closest Walmart location was open 24 hours a day. When asked about her shoes, Mercedes was reluctant to cooperate. Her foot size was a 6, smaller than what they had found at the scene, though she apparently didn't want any impressions taken of them. Still though, when police obtained surveillance footage from the Walmart Mercedes said she went to afterwards, her alibi held up. Footage of her vehicle had been captured by the store's exterior surveillance cameras as it was driving in the parking lot. With this, the investigation into Amanda's murder began to lose steam. New leads were still chased down, many of which took detectives out of Massachusetts and into surrounding states. However, none of them were even close to as promising as the ones that they had already covered. As weeks turned into months, it soon became clear that they were grasping at straws, and things were about to get a whole lot worse before they got better. Around the time that the investigation into Amanda Plasse's murder had hit a dead end, the public learned that her family and friends had been dealt a second gut punch after several members of the Chicopee Police Department were implicated in a photo-sharing scandal related to the case. In particular, 4 members of the police department, a group consisting of 2 sergeants and 2 officers, had been accused of taking photos of Amanda's body with their personal cell phones, and then sending and showing these images to fellow officers as well as members of the public. According to reports from the time, Sergeant Keith LeMay and Officer Terry Deck were the ones that actually took the photos. LeMay passed some of these photos on to a second sergeant, Jeffrey Godier, who then emailed them to Patrolman Chad Levesque. Levesque then showed them to members of the public at a youth football game. Terry Deck, meanwhile, sent his images to other officers in the department in 6 separate emails. The incident was not only a horrific and tasteless blow to Amanda's loved ones, it also understandably had the effect of sowing major distrust between the public and the city's police force, at a time when it was already becoming clear that the Chicopee police were struggling to solve Amanda's murder. In the end, the police officers accused in the scandal would receive letters of reprimand, with the 2 who took the photos additionally ordered to work 3 unpaid shifts. While the exact impact of a situation like this is hard to measure, reports from the time do mention that it was a hot-button issue between then-Mayor Michael Bissonnette and his opponent Richard Koss. Both Koss and Amanda's mother, Michelle Matheson, were highly critical of the way Bissonnette handled the situation with the police department, and Bissonnette ended up losing the election. When Koss took over as mayor, he fired one of the sergeants involved in the scandal, Jeffrey Godier. However, Godier was ultimately able to get back on the force by taking a demotion to patrolman. Despite being faced with a stagnating investigation into Amanda's murder, as well as the added indignity of having photos of her body cruelly shared by some of the very people tasked with bringing her killer to justice, Amanda's family never gave up hope. Her mother, Michelle, in particular, did everything she could to keep her daughter's case alive, passing out flyers, putting up billboards, and holding memorial events like balloon launches and charity races, all with the goal of uncovering new information. In the meantime, Massachusetts State Police began taking a more active role in the case, especially after the fallout from the scandal. Inspired by Michelle's tireless efforts, 16 months into the case, they decided to start their investigation from scratch, looking for anything that might have been missed the first time. It was during this re-examination that they found it, the clue that would be the key to solving the entire case. By October of 2013, it had already been more than 2 years since Amanda Plasse's murder, and several months since detectives with the Massachusetts State Police had decided to restart their investigation. They had spent these months combing back through interviews, rechecking leads, and just generally going over all of the evidence that they had so far in the case. Part of this process was poring over the dozens of photos they had taken from the crime scene, images they had taken from every angle possible in hopes that something might be of value to them later on. While much of this was no doubt tedious, their meticulous efforts would finally pay off when detectives spotted something in a photo of Amanda's bedroom that had never caught their attention before. Written sideways along the edge of a whiteboard in red dry erase marker was a simple, yet ominous message. Quote, "Dennis was here, 8/11/11. The reason this was so unsettling to detectives was because up until now, they had not heard the name Dennis at all in connection with the case. They would soon learn they weren't the only ones. None of Amanda's family members or friends seemed to know who he was either. Yet it appeared that just 15 days before the murder, he had been in Amanda Plasse's bedroom. Detectives scoured Amanda's phone contacts and social media accounts. However, no matter how closely they looked, no one named Dennis was found. After several months of this, investigators tried a Hail Mary. They looked up phone records for everyone in the surrounding area and came up with 2 people with the name that they were looking for. The first man had no connection to the case. However, The second had a phone number that appeared several times in Amanda's call records. The man's name was Dennis Rosa Roman, and police would soon learn that at the time of the murder, he lived just a few blocks away from Amanda's apartment. Not only that, Dennis had a history of breaking into people's houses. When police first tracked Dennis Rosa Roman down, he was reluctant to talk. He said that he was too busy to speak with detectives and seemed like he was trying to give off the appearance that he didn't really know what they were talking about and didn't have much to say anyway. However, by the following day, Dennis had apparently had an abrupt change of heart. He agreed to sit down with detectives and answer some questions, saying that he wanted to help in whatever way he could. During this first interview, Dennis said he remembered Amanda from the neighborhood he used to live in, but said that he didn't know her all that well. He flat out denied ever being in her apartment and said that the extent of their relationship was that he would give her weed sometimes.
Never stepped in her house. I've never seen the inside of her house.
How long?
Because I had known
her before she was killed.
Like, say a week or two.
Okay.
2 weeks the most.
So you wasn't charging for the weed?
No, I wasn't charging her nothing. It was free. You know what I'm saying? Like, she was a nice girl.
How many times previously did you get weed for her?
Something like 3 times.
Despite Dennis's claims, detectives were more than a little suspicious, especially when they noticed his shoes, which appeared to be on the smaller side and of a similar kind to the prints that had been found at the crime scene.
What size do you wear?
7.5.
How long you had those sneakers?
That'd be about a year already.
After Dennis admitted that he wore men's 7.5 size shoes, detectives were confident that they were onto something. They asked to take impressions of the shoes, as well as to collect his palm prints and a DNA sample. After agreeing to both, and the evidence was taken, he abruptly ended the interview, though agreed to come back and speak with detectives later in the week. By the time Dennis arrived for his second interview, he said that he had new information that detectives might want to hear about. Suddenly, he said he remembered that a few days before Amanda's murder, she had complained to him that an unknown person had broken into her apartment and stolen things.
Amanda approached you about somebody breaking into her place?
Yeah. She just asked me if I knew anybody who broke into her house. She said somebody came into her house and took a couple things.
Was she accusing you of doing it?
No, she wasn't accusing me.
By this point, police already knew about the break-ins to Amanda's apartment. They had asked friends and family members after learning about Dennis's prior criminal history. Those close to Amanda said yes, she had been dealing with something like that. She had never reported it to police because the person responsible had just taken stupid things like extra bits of tip money she left lying around and other small things. But it was enough that it had definitely annoyed her. Realizing that Dennis was now trying to lie his way out of the situation, detectives confronted him with the whiteboard message. After previously denying ever going into Amanda's house, suddenly he pretended to have another epiphany.
This picture is inside her apartment. You ever seen this?
First time I'm seeing it,
Because she had a dry erase board here, and she right here, it says Dennis was here.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. I wrote my name on that.
With Dennis's presence in the apartment now established, investigators had one last line of questioning. They asked him about the DNA under Amanda's fingernails.
We processed the scene a lot.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is, we did find some things underneath her fingernails, and I just wonder, you never had a fight with her or anything like that, did you?
No.
Unfortunately for Dennis, this denial of any sort of physical altercation would not age well. Midway into the interview, detectives got the results of the samples they had taken from him during their last session. Everything, his shoes, his DNA, and his palm prints, were a match to the evidence investigators had recovered from the crime scene. In what was clearly a last-ditch effort, Dennis tried to change his story one last time. He said that he had been present at the time of Amanda's murder, but that it was actually someone else who was responsible. Rather than a killer, Dennis claimed that he was the person who had tried to save Amanda. Even when detectives tried to humor him, though, his story fell flat. He said he couldn't tell them who had committed the murder because he feared for his life. As investigators already knew, though, the evidence all pointed to just one suspect being present at the time of Amanda's murder, and that suspect was Dennis Rosa Roman. He was arrested at the end of the interview and charged with murder. At Dennis's trial in 2016, prosecutors laid out their theory of the case. They argued that Dennis had an obsession with Amanda Plasse, one that had built in the weeks leading up to her murder. They pointed to his prior history of break-ins, saying that he had been the person Amanda had complained about when her things started going missing. They speculated that he had left the message on her whiteboard to taunt her, and that maybe she had even realized who was responsible. However, before she could do anything about her stalker, Dennis had broken in one last time while she was getting ready for work, believing that she had already left. When she caught him, Dennis freaked out and killed Amanda in a terrifying and brutal attack. Dennis's defense team, meanwhile, carried on with the final story he had told police. He said that a drug dealer who he was afraid to name was really responsible, and claimed that authorities were withholding information and trying to frame him. Following the month-long trial, Dennis was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He subsequently attempted to appeal his sentence, but was denied a new trial. At the time of this recording, he remains incarcerated. While there's no shortage of things that horrify me about this case, I think one of the things that kept coming back to me as I was researching and writing this was the invasion of privacy. I don't know about you, but just the thought of being watched alone gives me a visceral sense of discomfort. The idea of being stalked for weeks on end with some person unknowingly being in the most intimate areas of your home is a whole other level of nightmare fuel, especially the taunting message that Dennis left on Amanda's whiteboard. I suppose it can be argued that police might never have caught him if it weren't for the message, but to me, that's just another terrifying idea in and of itself. Then, of course, there's the whole situation with the police and the photo sharing scandal. I can't even imagine how hard it must have been for Amanda's family and friends, especially as they had barely had time to wrap their heads around the awful thing that had happened to her in the first place. As far as that whole thing goes, while I would personally argue that the officers involved got off with way too light of a punishment, it seems that thanks to pushes from Amanda's family, steps have been taken to make sure nothing like that will happen again. A bill named after Amanda banning police and first responders from taking and sharing such photos was finally passed into law last year, almost 11 years after her death. In late 2015, the city of Chicopee also ended up settling a lawsuit filed by her family against the police department for $110,000.
Before we wrap up, we'd just like to give a shout out to everyone who made it this far into the video. As always, we hope you found today's story interesting and informative. A huge thanks as well to today's sponsor, Surfshark. Don't forget to check out the link in the description below to get your extra free 3 months today using our code CRIMEZONE at checkout. If you're looking for additional ways to support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.